Ever since I was young, I felt like love in my family was always conditional. My mom always seemed to look at my sister Kristen with so much warmth and pride, while I often felt overlooked. She would call me strong, telling me that I'd be fine on my own. But I soon realized that being called strong meant that I wouldn't receive the same affection or care. Even as a child, that realization stung deeply. Growing up, I always had this sense of not truly belonging. That feeling lingered with me for years. My parents got divorced when I was 3, and the memories I have from that time are filled with arguments and sadness. My mom promised she'd always be there for me, but soon after, she moved me to live with her parents, and that promise started to fade away. She met Richard, and after they got married, everything changed. Kristen was born, and suddenly all the attention shifted to her. She had blonde hair and blue eyes just like Richard, and my mom would proudly say, "This is our daughter." I felt more like an outsider in my own home. It seemed like everything revolved around Kristen. Her meals, her naps, her toys, while I was just told to wait and be patient. I remember my 6th birthday clearly. I got a small cake and a book, but there was no celebration because Kristen had a cold. But when Kristen turned 1, the whole house was filled with balloons, gifts, and guests. I began to feel like I didn't matter. Kristen was treated like royalty, and I was just someone they had to take care of. The more time passed, the stronger that feeling grew. The only person who ever made me feel seen was my dad, George. Despite the divorce, he stayed in touch with me, and he would secretly meet me at parks or school events with my grandmother. One day when I was 9, we sat together on a bench, and I asked him why I couldn't visit him more often. He looked sad and said, "Your mom won't let me." Then he said something that stuck with me forever. "You are special, Jennifer. Don't forget that." Those words became a small flame of hope inside me. As I grew older, I found solace in school. I worked hard and did well in my studies. Books became my escape, and praise from my teachers gave me a sense of strength. By the time I reached high school, I dreamed of going to a good university. I wanted to leave home, live on my own, and create a better life for myself. But when I shared my dream with my mom and Richard, they didn't respond the way I expected. My mom frowned, and Richard laughed like it was a joke. They told me there was no money for university. Kristen already had a savings account, but not me. "Community college is enough for you," Richard said, while my mom added, "Kristen has talent. She'll become an artist." I quietly argued, saying I worked hard too, but it didn't matter. That night, I cried alone in my room, looking up at the stars and wondering if my dreams would ever come true. The next weekend, I told my dad everything. He listened to me without interrupting, and then he said, "You should go to university. I'll help." I wanted to believe him, but I knew he didn't have much money. He owned a small bookstore and worked hard just to make ends meet. Still, he promised he'd find a way. In my final year of school, I worked harder than ever, earning a partial scholarship. But it still wasn't enough, and I felt defeated. Then, just before graduation, my dad took me to a small cafe and handed me an envelope with enough money for 4 years of college. I was stunned. "Where did you get this?" I asked. He smiled, tired but content, and said he'd worked 2 jobs, running the bookstore by day and driving a taxi at night. "I did it all for you," he said, "because you have potential. You need a chance to shine." That moment showed me what real love looked like. When I told my mom and Richard the first was going to university, they were angry and confused. My mom said, "George can't afford that," and Richard added, "You'll be let down." But I didn't care. When I left for university, only my dad came to say goodbye. My mom and Richard didn't show up because they said Kristen had a dance recital. But I wasn't sad, I was finally free. University became the place where I could truly be myself. I studied hard and worked part-time in the library where I met Patrick. He came in every day to borrow books on environmental issues. One day I asked him out, and he nervously told me he was a garbage collector. I was surprised, but I didn't judge him. He was proud of his work because he believed he was helping the planet. I admired his honesty and passion. His family welcomed me with open arms, and for the first time I felt truly accepted. After graduation, Patrick and I stayed together. I later learned that he wasn't just a garbage collector. He ran a family business in waste management. He had developed innovative ways to recycle and reduce waste, and his ideas were changing the industry. I loved how hardworking and kind he was. When he met my dad, they quickly became friends. Around that time, Kristen got engaged to a wealthy man, and my mom was thrilled. Kristen's wedding was huge and extravagant, and my mom bragged about it for months. But I didn't want a fancy wedding. I just wanted a life filled with real love. 3 years later, Patrick proposed to me. He cooked dinner, then pulled out a small box with a simple ring. I said yes, overwhelmed with joy. But when I told my mom and Richard, they were furious. "A garbage collector? my mom said in disgust. You're ruining the family name, Richard added. They refused to meet Patrick and mocked the ring. Is that all you're worth? My mom asked. I stayed calm and said, this ring means love. They told me they wouldn't come to the wedding, and I walked away knowing I no longer needed their approval. Our wedding was small but filled with love. Patrick surprised me by having his friend Paul McCartney perform a song for us. It was a dream come true. My dad walked me down the aisle and Patrick's family cheered and clapped. For the first time I felt like I had a real family. Afterward I posted a photo online of Patrick, me and Paul. My mom called, yelling, "You're trying to outshine Kristen's wedding." She demanded I delete the photo but I refused. It's my memory, my life, I told her. She threatened to cut me out of the will but I laughed. I didn't need her money. That night my mom and Richard came to our apartment, angry and demanding I take the post down. You're embarrassing us, they said. People will think your wedding was better. I told them it wasn't a competition. I'm just happy, I said. My mom shouted that I was jealous of Kristen but I calmly replied, you never saw me. Dad did. He believed in me. They then asked for money, claiming if Patrick knew Paul McCartney he must be rich. I looked at Patrick who stood by me strong and quiet. I said, I don't owe you anything. Patrick asked them to leave. This is our home, he said. And they left. I finally felt free. A few weeks later, Kristen messaged me. She wanted to meet at a cafe. She apologized, saying she had seen how badly they treated me, and that she'd been too scared to speak up. I forgave her and we talked for hours. It was a step toward repairing our relationship. My mom and Richard stayed distant and I was okay with that. My bond with my dad grew stronger, and Patrick's family treated me like their own. For the first time I felt truly safe and loved. One day Kristen called, crying. Mom and Richard are broke, she said. They had lived too extravagantly, spending beyond their means on fancy homes, vacations and private schools. Now they had no house and were staying with friends. Kristen said she couldn't support them alone as her husband was fed up. I didn't know what to do. They had treated me terribly for years but I told Patrick, and he said he'd support any decision I made. I visited my parents. They looked tired and old with no fancy clothes or cars. Just two people who had lost everything. I told them we could help but only a little. They were shocked. Why would you help us? My mom asked. I said, because carrying hate is heavy. I'm letting it go. Patrick and I gave them a small apartment from his company. Richard got a simple job at Patrick's office. At first he didn't like it but he had no choice. My mom learned to live simply and they both began to change. I didn't help them for their sake. I did it for me. Letting go of the past gave me peace. Real family isn't about blood. It's about love, kindness, and the people who stand beside you.